Okay, let's unpack this. If you tried keeping up with the news on June 12th, wow, your head might still be spinning a bit.
Oh, absolutely. It felt like just one major event after another.
Yeah, I mean, a day packed with really seismic stuff, tragedy in the skies, geopolitical tensions just flaring dramatically, big shifts happening right here at home.
And even, getting that first proper look at the sun's poles.
Hmm.
Amazing science mixed in.
Exactly. It was just an incredible spectrum covered in the sources we looked at, from, like you said, immediate, devastating human events to complex international stuff, economic nudges.
And fundamental scientific discovery, yeah.
Mhm.
There's a lot to take in.
And that's really what this deep dive is all about, isn't it? We're taking this pile of information and trying to cut through the noise together.
Pulling out the most important bits, the insights, maybe a few surprising details along the way.
Right. The mission here is for you listening to walk away feeling genuinely well informed about what actually happened. Understanding the context, the bigger picture.
Without getting totally overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of it all, because it was a lot.
We're looking for those connections, the so what behind the headlines. We'll navigate, the details of that awful plane crash, explore those major global flashpoints.
And look at key economic indicators, dive into some pretty sharp domestic political debates here in the U.S.
And then, yeah, venture out to space for that science milestone. It's quite the range, but let's take it piece by piece.
Well, sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's begin with that first, just overwhelming global shock. The Air India Flight 171 crash.
A truly horrific event, based on the sources, happened June 12, 2025, about 1:38 p.m. local time in India.
Right, Air India Flight AI 171. It was a Boeing 7878 Dreamliner going from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick.
And it crashed shortly after takeoff. Just devastating impact.
The numbers are staggering. Sources confirm at least 241 deaths out of 242 people on board.
Yeah, it's 230 passengers, 12 crew members, just one confirmed survivor mentioned.
Vishwash Kumaramesh, a 40-year-old British Indian citizen, found in seat 11A, remarkably.
But tragically, the death toll didn't stop there because of where it crashed.
Right into the BJ Medical College campus in the Meghani Nagar district.
Exactly. And sources mention medical students were among the victims on the ground in the dining hall. So the total could be over 245 dead.
Just awful. And the recovery, the DNA identification, that's all ongoing now at Civil Hospital Ahmedabad.
Looking at the technical side, the sources gave some crucial details. The plane itself, VTAMB.
A Boeing 7878 had about 41,000 flight hours, apparently, since it started flying for Air India back in 2014.
And eyewitnesses, well, they reported the plane seemed to be really struggling right from takeoff.
Yeah, like struggling to climb. Sources said it only got to about 190 meters, something like that, before it just plunged.
Witnesses also noted, and this could be significant, that the landing gear looked like it was still down.
And the flaps, the things that help with lift at low speed,
seemed incorrectly positioned, according to reports. And then, because it was headed for London, it had a full fuel load.
which explains the massive fireball on impact. Just a terrible combination.
The response on the ground, though, sounds like it was swift. Lots of Indian agencies involved, NDRF, the Air Force, local police, fire.
And critically, they recovered both black boxes quickly. That's key, isn't it?
Absolutely vital
Yeah.
for understanding exactly what went wrong. And the investigation, it's getting international help too.
FAA, NTSB, Boeing teams mobilizing to assist India.
Right. Now, it's obviously very early days for the investigation, but the sources did mention some preliminary speculation.
By what?
Things like the impact of the warm, dense air in Ahmedabad on engine performance. Potentially a loss of engine thrust.
Or those things that witnesses saw, the flaps, the landing gear anomalies? Could be factors.
Definitely things they'll be looking at closely.
And the significance of this, it goes way beyond the immediate tragedy, as terrible as that is.
Hugely significant. It's the first ever hull loss, meaning the aircraft is destroyed or damaged beyond repair for a Boeing 787.
Wow, first ever. And India's worst air disaster since, what, 1996?
That's right. So the repercussions are already starting to ripple out.
You mean like safety reviews?
Exactly. Expectations of production and safety reviews across the whole 787-8 fleet. Indian regulators might even temporarily ground the model.
And the markets reacted.
Oh yeah. Boeing stock took a big hit. Sources cited between 4.8% and maybe even 9%. GE Aerospace, who makes the engines, also dipped.
So renewed scrutiny on Boeing's safety and manufacturing, kind of like after the 737 MAX issues.
Very much so. It brings all those concerns right back to the forefront.
On the human side, though, Air India's owner, the Tata Group, they've stepped up.
Yes, pledged significant support, 10 million rupees per victim, commitment to rebuild the damaged college buildings. That's substantial.
And political leaders visited the site, PM Modi, Amit Shah.
Yes, and the Gujarat chief minister. Global condolences came into UK PM Keir Starmer, King Charles III, a global tragedy.
So, thinking about you, the listener, why does this specific event matter beyond the headlines?
Well, beyond the heartbreaking loss, it really does impact global confidence in air travel safety, especially around certain aircraft models.
And it puts that intense spotlight right back on the companies that build these planes and the processes for certifying them as safe.
It affects everyone who flies, ultimately.
Okay. Shifting from that tragedy, but staying with major global tension. The Middle East saw a significant escalation, according to the sources.
That's right, big development. Israel reportedly carried out airstrikes on dozens of targets inside Iran on June 12th.
And these weren't just random targets. Sources mentioned sites linked to Iran's nuclear program.
Correct. And following those strikes, Israel declared a state of emergency. This comes after, weeks of really simmering tensions.
And the U.S. response was immediate, right, reflecting the risk.
Yeah, evacuation of non-essential embassy staff from neighboring Iraq. Contingency plans apparently ready to cross the region for U.S. personnel.
Sources suggested this was because they anticipated potential Iranian retaliation. Like they knew Israel was preparing something.
That seems to be the implication, yes. And Iran's reaction was, well, predictable in its severity.
What did they say?
Their defense ministry issued a threat, basically saying they'd target U.S. bases in the region if the conflict escalated further.
And the nuclear angle here is really prominent in the sources, isn't it?
Very much so. The IAEA, the International Nuclear Watchdog, reportedly declared Iran non-compliant.
For the first time since 2005. Regarding their nuclear safeguards obligations?
That's the report. And there were even suggestions Israel was positioned to strike specific nuclear facilities, but was waiting to notify the U.S.
Wow. And all this happening while nuclear talks were supposed to be resuming?
Exactly. U.S.-Iran negotiations were scheduled to start again in Oman around this time. Just highlights the complexity.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how these global tensions ripple back home here in the U.S.?
Well, sources noted progressive lawmakers, Rep. Delia Ramirez was mentioned, pushing again to block U.S. arms sales to Israel.
Reflecting that ongoing debate and the protests we've seen over U.S. foreign policy, especially regarding Gaza.
Absolutely. So, for you listening, these moves in the Middle East, they obviously raise the specter of a wider regional conflict.
Which could have huge, unpredictable global impacts, right? Energy markets, shipping.
Diplomatic channels get strained, and it fuels that really sharp debate right here in the U.S. about America's role in the world, particularly the Middle East.
And those two major flashpoints, the crash and the Middle East escalation, they weren't the only signs of global instability reported, were they?
No, not at all. The sources painted a broader picture of ongoing challenges and crises elsewhere, too.
Like the famine warnings.
Yes, urgent warnings from the World Food Program, the UN, for parts of Sudan and South Sudan. Conflict, paramilitary actions driving this risk of mass starvation.
Just shows how conflict fuels these humanitarian disasters.
Definitely. And elsewhere, the Russia-Ukraine war continued to grind on. Renewed Russian drone and missile attacks reported, despite ceasefire calls. Just ongoing instability there.
And tensions in Asia.
Yeah, a report of a Chinese fighter jet flying dangerously close to a Japanese reconnaissance plane highlights that risk of miscalculation in contested areas.
The sources also mention other tragedies, like that boat sinking in Congo.
Yes, amid extreme weather, at least 30 deaths underscores issues with safety, infrastructure in some places.
And there was an update on that nightclub collapse in the Dominican Republic from April.
Right. Arrests were made. Focus shifting to accountability for those building safety violations that led to, 236 deaths.
Plus, closer to home, severe storms hit San Antonio, Texas. Fatalities, damage, a reminder of weather extremes.
So yeah, all these different events, geographically scattered, but they kind of collectively paint this picture of fragility, ongoing crises around the world.
And they have real-world impacts, right? Supply chains, migration, international aid.
Absolutely, it all connects.
Okay, let's bring the focus closer to home now for many of our listeners. The sources detailed some pretty significant domestic shifts and political divides playing out right here in the U.S.
Yeah, a really prominent one getting a lot of attention was that planned military parade in Washington, D.C.
Scheduled for June 14th. Ostensibly for the Army's 250th anniversary.
But also coinciding with President Trump's birthday, which definitely added a layer of, well, controversy for some.
And there was significant opposition reported.
Oh, yeah. Over 1,500 anti-parade demonstrations reportedly organized across the country.
What were their main objections?
Critics cited in the sources denounced what they saw as sort of authoritarian symbolism, and the cost, of course. Estimates range from $25 million up to $45 million.
So this whole thing, it really just throws those deep partisan and cultural divides in the U.S. into sharp relief, doesn't it?
It really does. It's more than just arguing about a parade. It touches on how people view military pageantry, the relationship between civilian government and the military.
And inevitably, perceptions of President Trump's public image and leadership style.
Exactly. So it's not just about the budget line item. It's a visible symbol of these different views within the nation about the military, about leadership, about public spending, issues relevant to you, regardless of where you stand politically.
Another area showing real domestic tension and policy shifts was immigration and border security.
Right. A key development reported was U.S. military personnel being deployed to actually detain immigrants at the southern border.
Which is a significant move, using the military in that role.
It is. It represents a notable expansion of the military's role in what's typically civilian law enforcement territory.
And it's controversial legally, right? Challenging the Posse Comitatus Act.
Yes, that act generally restricts using the military for domestic law enforcement. Sources also noted some Republican-led states introducing new military trespassing charges as part of this.
And these actions, along with other administration crackdowns, like on student activists, they've fueled protests.
Reportedly, yes. Broader nationwide protests. The sources mentioned the arrest and release of a graduate student, Mahmoud Khalil, becoming a sort of rallying point.
And criticism from civil liberties groups, universities.
Vocal criticism, yes. And the tension over border policy, it even spilled over into confrontations between branches of government.
You mean that incident with the senator?
Yeah, sources described a U.S. senator being forcibly removed, even handcuffed, during a Department of Homeland Security press conference. Just highlights the intense disagreements.
So these actions, the reactions, they directly touch on civil liberties, the role of the military in society.
And they feed into that huge ongoing national debate about immigration affecting communities and the whole political landscape that you were navigating.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still on major White House announcements. President Trump also claimed a new trade deal with China.
Yes, he announced what he described as a new agreement, aimed at reducing tariffs, getting the U.S. access to Chinese rare earth materials.
Critical materials, yeah. And easing restrictions on Chinese students, some exports.
That was the description. However, and this is important, the sources included nuance here.
Meaning?
Chinese officials reportedly downplayed the announcement, and many specifics of this supposed deal remained unclear or, well, unconfirmed.
So a potential major development if it comes to fruition.
Right. If implemented fully, it could significantly impact global supply chains, that complex U.S.-China relationship.
But maybe some question marks around the announcement itself.
It seems that way, based on the reports. Still, trade deals, especially with a huge economy like China's, they matter.
They can affect everything, can't they? The cost of goods you buy, availability of materials for tech, international relations, it's all connected.
Definitely something to watch.
And finally, on the domestic policy front, another significant change reported was over at the CDC.
Yes, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Sources reported the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary dismissed the entire CDC vaccine advisory panel.
A whole panel. Wow. And replace them with
individuals described in the sources as critics of the government's previous COVID-19 response.
Okay, and that move drew pushback.
Swift and pretty widespread condemnation, yeah. From groups like the American Medical Association, lots of public health experts.
What are their main concerns?
Significant concerns, as cited in the sources. They warned this could worsen already declining vaccination rates in the country.
Which could lead to outbreaks of preventable diseases, measles, things like that.
That's the fear, yes, that it undermines public trust and could have serious public health consequences.
So public health policy, especially vaccines, it directly impacts the health and safety of you, your family, your community.
Absolutely. And this decision really highlights that ongoing tension, sometimes conflict, between political appointees and scientific expertise within government agencies.
Okay, let's cast our gaze across the Atlantic now, see what the sources reported about economic currents and other European perspectives.
All right. Starting with the U.S. stock markets, actually. They saw some modest gains on June 12th.
A little bit of green. S&P 500 up 0.4%. Dow and NASDAQ both up 0.2%.
Right. The small-cap Russell 2000 did dip slightly, though, down 0.4%, but generally upward movement.
What was driving that optimism?
Sources indicated it was largely down to positive inflation figures, wholesale price data coming in favorably.
Which makes people think the Fed might cut rates later.
Exactly. It pushed down Treasury yields and sparked that hope for Fed rate cuts later in 2025. Plus, Oracle had strong earnings, which also helped.
So the stock market, often seen as that barometer for the economy, affects investments, retirement funds.
Right. And the factors driving it, inflation, Fed rates, they directly impact borrowing costs, the prices you pay every day.
Now contrast that relatively positive U.S. market picture with the economic news out of the U.K. Sources reported a contraction there.
That's right. UK GDP actually shrank by 0.3% in April, declines in both services and manufacturing.
Oof. Although the broader quarter still showed some growth.
Yeah, Q2 overall was still showing a modest 0.7% expansion, according to the data cited, but that monthly figure was a downturn.
And a key pressure point mentioned was U.S. tariffs.
Yes. Significant factor, apparently. New U.S. tariffs on UK steel and aluminum exports. Sources estimated this reduced trade by about £2 billion.
So that's a concrete example of trade tensions hitting an economy.
Definitely. And UK financial markets reportedly reacted with some volatility to this news.
It just shows, doesn't it? National economic performance affects jobs, businesses, public services.
And those international freight tensions, like the U.S. tariffs, show how global politics can have direct economic consequences for countries and potentially impact the cost or availability of goods you use.
Beyond the economy, what else was happening in Europe, according to the sources?
Well, defense was a big theme. At a meeting in Rome, the NATO Secretary General really emphasized the need for European nations to boost defense budgets and industrial capacity.
Setting a target for, like, 2029, 2030.
Yes. And this aligns, of course, with Ukrainian leaders continuing to push for tougher sanctions on Russia and more weapons from allies.
And Denmark made a move related to defense.
Yeah, sources mentioned Denmark ratified a defense pact granting the U.S. access to bases there, closer military ties.
On a sadder note, Austria was reportedly mourning after a school shooting tragedy.
Yes, just awful news there.
And then a really stark event highlighting social tensions. Those riots in Ballymena, Northern Ireland.
Yes. Sources describe 3 nights of racially motivated violence. It apparently followed a vigil related to an assault that reportedly involved some foreign youths.
And the outcome. Police officers injured, immigrant homes attacked.
18 officers injured, yes, and attacks on homes. The sources really frame this as underscoring these deep societal tensions around race, identity, displacement in that community.
Just shows those issues are simmering in many places.
Indeed. And the sources also had brief mentions of other political items, former Brazilian President Bolsonaro denying a coup plot, but discussing alternatives.
Argentina's President Milei getting an award in Jerusalem for supporting Israel. Dutch politics seeing a merger of center-left parties. Just snapshots of ongoing global politics.
Right. Europe remains a key global player. So developments there, defense shifts, alliances, internal social issues, political changes, they all have ripple effects globally on international relations, security, trade, all potentially irrelevant to you.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive with something a bit different. Moving away from the immediate crises and politics.
Into the realm of science, culture, human experience.
Exactly, as highlighted in our sources. And this first one is, well, out of this world, literally. A major science breakthrough.
The first ever close-up images of the sun's poles. Really cool stuff.
From the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter mission, a joint thing with NASA.
That's the one. They released these images on June 12th. The images themselves were actually taken back in March.
When the probe was pretty close, relatively speaking, about 40 million miles away.
Yeah, and crucially, its orbit was tilted, about 15 to 17 degrees off the ecliptic plane, that flat disk where the planets orbit.
So getting that above the action view, looking down on the pole.
Precisely. Gives us a unique angle we haven't had before. And the images from various instruments on board.
What do they actually show?
They reveal fascinating details about the sun's magnetic field near the South Pole. Things described as tangled, chaotic magnetic flux.
Yeah.
Mixed magnetic polarity.
Okay, translate that for us. Huh.
Basically, it means the magnetic field lines near the poles are super complex, jumbled up, pointing in lots of different directions, which actually fits with the theoretical models.
And this gives us data from just after the solar maximum peak, right? October 2024.
Correct. Captures that specific era. Now, so what? Why does this matter to us down here?
Yeah, why do we care about the sun's poles?
Because, as the source has highlighted, understanding this better significantly improves our ability to forecast solar winds and geomagnetic storms.
And that forecasting is critical, right? For satellites, communication, power grids.
Incredibly important. Solar activity can disrupt all those technologies we rely on every single day. GPS, communications, power. Better forecasting helps us prepare, mitigate the impact.
And there was even a direct connection mentioned, like right now.
Yeah. Sources noted NOAA actually issued a G2 geomagnetic storm watch for June 13th and 14th, based on current conditions.
G2, does that mean?
It signals the possibility of seeing the aurora, northern lights, potentially visible further south than usual, like in the northern U.S.
Wow. So this abstract science has immediate, potentially beautiful consequences.
It really does. And they expect even more detailed data as the probe's orbit tilts further by 2026. Plus, other missions like NASA's PUNCH will add more pieces to the puzzle.
Amazing stuff. Okay, finally, just a couple of quick notes on sports and culture from the sources.
Right. The 125th U.S. Open Golf Tournament kicked off on June 12th.
At Oakmont, famously difficult course.
Yep.
J.J. Spawn was leading after day one.
Reportedly, yes, with big names like Scheffler and McIlroy trailing.
And there was a rare highlight, Patrick Reed.
Scored an albatross, 3 under par on a single hole. Very rare in golf. Sources also noted storms are expected, so that could definitely shake things up.
Always adds drama. And one other important note from June 12th.
World Day Against Child Labor, an annual observance run by the International Labor Organization, the ILO.
And the focus this year was on the scale of the problem still.
Yeah, highlighting that there are still 138 million children in labor worldwide, 54 million facing hazardous conditions. Just staggering numbers.
What was the theme?
Progress is clear, but there's more to do. A call for continued global action to meet that UN Sustainable Development Goal of ending child labor.
So these points, the skill and drama of elite sport on one hand and the vital work on major human rights challenges on the other.
They just remind us of those broader aspects of human endeavor and global awareness that continue alongside all the immediate breaking news.
So we've really covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? Navigating a pretty dense stack of information from just one day.
We really have. From that awful aviation tragedy, escalating global tensions, shifts in U.S. policy, economic ups and downs.
A breakthrough in solar science, glimpses of culture, ongoing humanitarian work. It's a lot.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you dig into the sources like this, you see connections you might miss, just scanning headlines.
Yeah, you start to see how an event in one place can ripple outwards, or how seemingly separate domestic issues might actually share some underlying currents.
Exactly. As we finish up here, maybe something to think about. A lot of the events we touched on, those riots in Northern Ireland, the tensions at the U.S. border, the protests over foreign policy, even some political shifts.
They all seem to reveal these underlying fractures, don't they? Anxieties, maybe.
Yeah, anxieties about identity, about displacement, about how power and resources are distributed in a world that feels like it's changing so fast and getting, more complexly connected.
So what does the convergence of all these seemingly disparate events tell you about where things stand globally and domestically? And maybe think back over everything we've discussed.
What's one specific detail, one insight that genuinely made you pause and think differently today? Something to mull over.